let people know that we will be recording the presentation part of this session, which will be shared on our website and our YouTube, and it will be shared with everybody. And any sort of resources and links that are shared today will be shared with everybody who attended and registered for this meeting. We won't be recording the discussion Q&A portions. Um, Yes. So again, thank you everyone for joining us for this housing advocacy event. I'm very glad there's so many people here joining us. This really points to the high interest and the importance of this topic. So my name is Shannon, and my pronouns are she and her, and I'm a community planner at Social Planning Toronto. I'm joined by a few of my colleagues here at Social Planning Toronto, including Melissa, who will be co-facilitating with me, and who is the Director of Engagement and Strategic Initiatives at Social Planning Toronto. We are also joined by Dominique from Kensington Market Community Land Trust, Chiara from York South Weston Tenant Union, Jonella from Right to Housing TO, and Laura from Don Valley Community Legal Services. So we have a really great session planned with presentations from these fantastic guest speakers we have here who are representing organizations doing really critical work in advocacy within the housing and tenant space. So as many of you may know, the City of Toronto is currently undergoing their budget process. The proposed staff budget was released earlier this month on January 8th. And next week, on January 20th and 21st, the public has the opportunity to provide their comments and help influence and shape the city budget, and being able to depute and give deputations to the city budget committee. So they have an understanding of the priorities of residents and where additional investments are needed. And this is a really prime opportunity for everyone to raise awareness and speak of the needs for increased investment in affordable housing, tenant supports and programs, rent control, and more. So our guests today will be sharing some of their experiences, advocacy work, and key housing budget asks and messages that you can use in your deputations and when you make your appeals and speak to the city budget committee, if you are planning to do so. We hope so you are. So for today's agenda, we're going to start off by providing a brief overview of the budget. We'll also have our guest presentations. I do want to point out here as well too, we do have a Q&A, a chance to ask questions and discussions. I have a discussion at the end of the guest presentations, but I will, for Dominique from the Kensington Market CLT, who'll be speaking to MURA, we will have a short sort of question and answer period since they're not able to stay for the whole session. So if you have any questions after the first presentation, we'll have a few minutes for you to ask your questions. But if you think of a question after, that's totally fine. Feel free to send us those questions or even ask it in the Q&A at the end, and we can follow up with Dominique, who'll be happy to provide answers to those questions. Yeah. And just for today's session, we're hoping that you'll be able to learn more about the city budget, especially when it comes to housing affordability, tenant protections, and programs. We're hoping that you'll be able to find ways to be more involved in housing advocacy, not only within the budget period, but outside of the budget period as well too. And how you can engage with these organizations and people with these organizations, representing these organizations today in housing advocacy, because it is very much needed, as well as build confidence to participate in the budget committee deputation process, as well as have those key messages that you can ask the budget committee next week. So a quick check-in question, and feel free to use the chat, or even, if you want to raise your hand and say a few words. What housing and tenant issues are most important to you? What messages would you like to convey to the budget committee? So this is just a quick check-in question. If there's anybody who, you can use a chat. I'll have the chat open here. as well as, if you feel free to unmute yourselves, raise your hands and unmute yourselves. I see Jason here saying more affordable and supportive housing required. That is a definite guarantee. Yes, I totally agree with that. Anybody else wants to share what housing or tenant issues are important to them? Or what is something that you want to tell this? Oh, I see someone unmuted. Can't see who unmuted, but if somebody wants to speak. Yes, Jason.
Morning, everyone. I really want to take the opportunity during budget deputations to speak on housing and the way it's looked at in city budget itself. So right now, the way things are set up in the budget is we have a lot of money fixed to other areas of city budget. This year in particular, we have a considerable budget increase being allocated towards policing, which is fine. I mean, policing is a good way to spend money. However, this is the first time in like decades where every metric of policing is actually had a considerable decrease. So right now, committing those additional funds like that to something that is already working for the system seems pretty poor allocation for our funding. In addition to that, if you look at places like Dunhouse as an example, we spent between the city and the healthcare system, they spent $14 million to build that building. And we actually saved over $2 million in healthcare alone from the first year of housing those 50 individuals that are there. So we need to stop looking at spending money on housing as an afterthought. Right now they spend the money everywhere else, and every agency, whether it be supportive housing or whether it be trying to get senior citizens air conditioners for their units or whatever else. That's everybody's arguing over the same peanuts that are left over. We need to start thinking about things that are going to help us in the long shot, and spending money on areas that are actually going to allow us to create significant savings, which we can put back into the systems and generate a better, more functioning budget for everyone, right? I think the first couple of years of doing that's going to sting, but that comes out of capital expenditures. It doesn't come out of budget expenditures right away. And then the additional savings we're going to be seeing from what ends up transpiring afterwards, but by housing individuals rather than trying to put everybody in shelter at the end. I think that's important to communicate.
Thank you so much, Jason. I like that comment you made of we need to stop thinking about housing as an afterthought. So thank you so much for sharing that and sharing your thoughts. Bob, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, good morning. I'd like to talk about the City of Toronto housing list that we have, depending on what numbers we listen to. Nobody knows. It's just maybe 13,000, 11,000, 12,000, whatever number is made up during that particular day. The biggest landlord in the City of Toronto is the City of Toronto. The biggest landlord that has discrepancies in their buildings, whether it be pest control, mold, mildew, plumbing, electricity, is the City of Toronto. So the City of Toronto can't clean out their own house. How are they supposed to make it any better for us looking on that never ever housing list? And also on that housing list, I've been on this one in Toronto, and I can't even go look at the property. I just have to go through a screen and pick that address. And if it's no good, doesn't work for me, then I go to the bottom of the list. So I'll be dead by the time my name comes up on this list. We need in the City of Toronto the hole is so deep to fix our own house. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for sharing your experience, Bob. I'm seeing some people here in the chat saying real rent control, support for land trusts, safety of tenants from unwanted intruders, deeply affordable and accessible, adaptable housing, Example, universal design. Barriers to access at the LTB. It's all online. Not everyone is tech savvy. I agree with that. Rent control, bylaw protection for rental housing, eradication of vacancy decontrol, and moving tenants from transitional housing into permanent housing. That's a very good point as there as well too. Accessible shelter spaces, yeah, and safe shelter spaces and safe spaces for homeless people. I'm seeing another hand up here. I'm seeing it CX is what I'm seeing listed as the name.
Yes. Hello, my name is
Hello.
CX. I wanted to respond to this question. I'm somebody that uses a wheelchair and has multiple disabilities. I'm also queer and trans and on ODSP. And I've lived in a co-op for the last 20 years, but I've been trying to resource other housing options because my co-op is not safe for who I am. And to find accessible housing is almost impossible. That is safe and deeply affordable on ODSP. I've had a lot of challenges with RGI, rent geared to income. And so for me, it's like, if I don't have this housing, I'm homeless. And I feel like there needs to be more options around finding housing for those of us who are vulnerable. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you. Yeah, definitely agree with that. Having more options where you feel safe, right? And, meets your needs. So thank you so much for that. So yeah, so another hand. Yeah, so thank you everyone for participating in the check-in question section. And it's really great to hear and see in the chat as well too, everyone's, all these issues and why, and this is why we need to really participate in the budget process. So we have that money to be able to fund some of these issues and invest in more housing that is safe, accessible, and everything that everyone brought up in the chat. So now I'll pass it on to Melissa, who will talk a bit about the City of Toronto budget.
Thanks. I do see that Nadia has her hand up, so I just wanted to see if Nadia you wanted to add one more thing before we closed off the sharing.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that I had that same situation about when I was on looking for housing, like for we call it like a transfer, right? They were transferring me to a building that I didn't like, and yeah, and they were threatening me that they would put me at the bottom of the list, right? But then I have worked with my fortunately I had a good social worker, so men she managed to put me back on the list. So yeah. So I ran into a situation like that.
Thanks for sharing that, Nadia. That is yeah, it's a difficult process going through the housing selection. So thanks for sharing that. So I'm going to talk a little bit, just to give a quick overview of the city budget. And so if you could just go to the next slide. So this year's, I noticed that this is wrong. So we're actually in 2026. So sorry for that. Oops. So this should say 2026 budget. I'll just make a quick edit there. This is the 2026 city budget. The city has an operating and a capital budget, and the operating budget for the city of Toronto this year is now $18.8 billion. And that pays for services and programs that the city delivers, including community housing, shelters, childcare, libraries, transit and recreation centers, among many other services that you use every day. That budget is larger than the size of some of the budgets of some provinces in Canada. And also, they included in this year's budget is a 10-year capital plan, and that now is at $59.6 billion. And that is the money that gets allocated towards building and maintaining the city's infrastructure. So that includes the roads, the sewer systems, and also includes paying to fix and build new recreation centers, libraries, and community housing and shelters. Next slide. So some of the challenges with the city's budget comes to the kind of revenue that it can raise. So in particular this year, there's been limited revenue from PTC ridership, and that is a fair chunk of the city's revenue that comes in. The municipal land transfer tax that comes out of real estate transactions is down because of low real estate sales. And the city doesn't have a lot of tools to raise money. So it can't, it doesn't have many tools like income tax or sales tax that grow with the economy. And so we are limited with the property tax and the other revenue tools that we have to raise money. And the city is also required to balance its budget each year. It can't carry a deficit like the federal and provincial government. Other risks to the city's budget this year is that some of the funding that comes from the other levels of government are expiring. So the new deal with the province that has paid for some transit and shelter funding is now is going to be expiring at the end of this year, as well as some of the funding for community safety programs and other housing and shelter programs. And there's also been changes to development charges. That comes out of when new buildings are being developed. The province has changed those rules, and so the city is not getting as much money, which goes into what the cities be able to build in terms of infrastructure. So also when it comes to affordable housing, these budgetary pressures are further exacerbated by things that are not within the city's control. So things like the higher cost to build new affordable housing, the erosion of tenant protections at the provincial level, and also things like social assistance rates. So all of these things affect the price of affordable housing and affect renters in Toronto as well. And so they're out of the city's control, and so it does limit what the city can do in terms of its services. But let's go on to talk a little bit about the city budget process. So the city budget process is almost a year-long process. The city staff start developing the process as early as the spring of the previous year. And once they have gone through some of that process, they go and they host public consultations. And this is something that's new that the current mayor, Olivia Chow, has started with her team to do public consultations in the fall. So that the city staff and members of council can hear what the top budget priorities are for members of the public. And then in January, at the beginning of January, the budget is launched. There's some time given for the public and members of council to review it and share your comments. So the deputations, telephone town halls, those are held in order for city members of the budget committee to hear from the public. And then there's a wrap-up meeting that's held where the budget committee is given a chance to share recommendations to the mayor on changes they think should be made to the budget. And then as a part of the strong mayor powers, the provincial legislation, the mayor is required to release their budget by February 1st. And then city council has a special meeting where they get to vote on any changes they want to see to the budget. And that is going to be on February 10th. Next slide. So some of the community priorities that have come up in the budget. So during the fall, the city also partnered with Albion Neighborhood Services to host local community-focused consultations with low-income residents. And these were smaller focus group-like sessions that were held at community-based agencies. And not surprisingly, people identified many of the same things that came out of the public consultations, things like affordable housing, the high cost of living, transit, lack of affordable childcare, and lack of access to affordable childcare, lack of good jobs and tenant supports. And those were some of the high priorities that were listed during that session, and really aligned with some of the things that came out of the broader public consultations as well. Next slide. So if you are going to depute, these are the folks that sit on the budget committee that you will get to speak to. So at each of the budget subcommittee meetings where they hear the deputations, there's usually about 3 members of the budget committee that are there. They've split up their time between the 4 civic centers. And so it includes Lily Cheng, who represents the Willowdale area, Gord Perks in Parkdale, Shelley Carroll in Don Valley North, Jamal Myers in Scarborough Agincourt, Amber Murley, who represents South Etobicoke, and Chris Moyes in Toronto Centre. Next slide. And here are just some of the key budget dates. As I mentioned, the budget was launched on January 8th. Right now, the city is, the budget committee is hearing from presentations from each of the departments. And then on the 20th and 21st is when those deputations will take place. And that's where you get a chance to speak directly to the budget committee. And then last Thursday, Wednesday and Thursday, the 14th and 15th, is also when there were some telephone town halls that were held. And then the latest budget release will get released most likely on January 30th because it has to be before February 1st or by February 1st. And it falls on a weekend. So it's most likely going to be the 30th. And then the final vote for council is February 10th. We're going to have a big city budget rally that we've been doing for the past few years. So we're hope you can join us at City Hall to share what's important so we can make some noise outside of City Hall and tell City Council where they really should be putting their investments. Next slide. So here's the deputation schedule. So if you are planning to depute, you can depute online or in person at, there's going to be sessions held at City Hall, the North York Civic Center, and those are going to be on the 20th. And on the 21st, they're going to be at Scarborough Civic Center and Etobicoke Civic Center. And we'll share the link in the chat. I think it's already been shared. We can share it again of where you can go to register for those sessions. And you do need to register by 4:30 p.m. the day before the meeting to make sure that you're on the list. If you require accommodations, make sure that you include that in your email. They often do have ASL interpretation or a live captioner, but please make sure that you include that so that they we make sure that city staff make sure that they have that secured for everybody on those days if you require it. So that's it. We really do encourage you to participate. We've had some big wins when it comes to the city budget, and it makes a difference when people come out and share their experiences, why we need to see investments in particular areas. We've seen wins when it comes to moving away from policing alternatives, things like the Toronto Community Crisis Service pilot that's been expanded citywide, things like the rent bank and the eviction and prevention and community program. We've seen investments to those through ongoing advocacy, investments in shelter, building new shelters through ongoing advocacy and raising our voice throughout the year, but also really at the budget time as well. So we definitely encourage you to get involved. I'm going to turn it back to Shannon to introduce our speakers.
Thank you so much, Melissa. So we have our first speaker. So Dominique is a co-founder and currently the co-director of the Kensington Market Community Land Trust. She was previously the research coordinator for the Canadian Network of Community Land Trusts. So thank you, Dominique, and I'll pass it on to you. Just let me know when you want me to switch the slides.
Great, thanks. So I'm excited to be here, and I will be speaking about Kensington Market, obviously, but the budget asks are much larger, and maybe use this as an example of the way that you can speak in your community. So the next, we can go to the next slide. So Kensington Market, we define it, you probably know it, it's a place to start for newcomers, new ideas. It's a fierce and welcoming community. It's like a lot of the communities where there's working class immigrant neighborhoods. It's under considerable pressure from gentrification. The next slide. So Kensington Market, there's a dramatic increase in residential rents. So we've seen rents go up by 98.6%. Next slide. And then some other factors. So the rents have gone up more than in other parts of the city. In the medium, 64% of residents in Kensington Market are renters, so it's a primarily renters neighborhood. And 44% of renters pay more than 1/3 of their income on shelter costs, and a similar 30% of homeowners. And as you all know, the waiting list for the social housing in Kensington Market is as long as in the rest of the city. Next slide. So that's sort of the origin story of the Kensington Market Community Land Trust. That's where we come in. This is the staff and board of last year. So we are a mixed-use community land trust. That is, we are a neighborhood-based mutual aid organization that tries to preserve and protect the spirit of the neighborhood, the people in the neighborhood, and both the residential and the commercial side. Next slide. So we currently own, and I'll go through it, we own 3 buildings. So our first one is 5456, 12 residential units, 5 commercial units. We, this year in June, or no, in sometime early summer, we acquired 380 Spadina, which has 2 residential units and 1 commercial unit. And then shortly thereafter, we acquired 302 Spadina, which has 26 residential and 11 commercial units. And so those buildings, what we do is we take those buildings off the speculative market. We protect the rents and the people in those buildings, and we do that in perpetuity, so essentially forever. And which means that these the amount of rent that is being paid will gradually decrease, which is important to point out, and the difference between a private public partnership, where often that affordability is lost. So this is an investment by the city. As you notice, there's the funding, Section 37 and MURA. That's an investment by the city in affordability forever. We're also the leaseholder for housing that's being built in the parking lot in Kensington Market, 35 Bellevue, and we'll be working with St. Clair's as our operating partner there, and that's 78 units of supportive housing. So let's go to the next slide. So we'd say real estate isn't profit, it's people. And you can see the images of some of our commercial and residential tenants. Next slide. So we also do a lot of community advocacy, and so I'm interested to hear other presentations in way that we can support, because when we're asked, what's the most important thing you could do to support community land trust, one of the things is stop evicting people. That would really help. If we had vacancy, if we got rid of vacancy decontrol, that would be huge, but obviously that's not in the realm of the budget. But just to say that we support a lot of other things, and not just what I'm going to speak to specifically. So we're advocating for commercial affordability, supporting neighborhood legacy businesses and small businesses generally. We are concerned about tenant rights. We are looking at encampment support, and we're very concerned with the affordability in new developments. So that's a sort of picture of where we're at in terms of our organization. Next slide. This is an example of some of our advocacy. So this is you can come and see this in Paminar during the month of February. We worked with some with architecture students to come up with some generous and affordable housing, building housing that respects the neighborhood and is also not just a small box, but really thinking about what a community, what housing needs. It's not just a box that we house people in, it's part of a community. So we were partnered with the University of Waterloo, the School of Architecture, which is as part of a national architecture studio. So that's one aspect, for example, of our advocacy. Next slide, please. So, however, and this is a really key message in terms of the budget, 15 existing affordable units are lost for each purpose-built rental unit between 2011 and 2021. We cannot build our way out of the housing crisis. There is a leaky bucket. Next slide. So what we really need to do, and taking existing affordable buildings into non-market hands is the fastest way to help with the housing crisis. It prevents homelessness and displacement and supports strong neighborhoods. So it's really important to be looking at the fastest and the way of protecting people is to buy these vulnerable buildings that are being specifically targeted because the rents are low. And the idea is someone buys it, shakes the tenants out, like there's so many fleas in a carpet, and rent those out for much higher. So it's very, very important to be protecting those buildings. Next slide. So the key message for the budget is that, and this isn't specific to the Kensington Market Community Land Trust, it is a way, as I saw in the chat, it is a way to support land trusts, but it supports housing and tenants broadly, the non-market housing sector. So MURA needs more funding. MURA, I don't know why they called it that, but the Multi-Unit Residential Acquisition Program, it comes out of Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust Advocacy. So CLT Advocacy, it's the first of its kind in Canada, and it served as a blueprint for other programs in North America. And so it's really key. We need funding for this MURA program to help nonprofit organizations acquire existing naturally occurring affordable housing. And that's the kind of housing where somebody maybe as an example, in one of our buildings, somebody was living there for 40 years. Their rent was very low. The appeal, if we hadn't bought that building at 54, 56, you can imagine how much more money would be made by evicting that person. So MURA is really key, and it needs to be well funded. Next slide. So we need to have it funded every year. So what we get through MURA, what you get what they call per door for each housing unit is actually quite low. And when you're trying to get MURA, you have to also show that you have other sources of funding. So, but costs, as was mentioned, are increasing every year. So we really need to fund it adequately for CLTs and nonprofit housing providers to be able to purchase more buildings. So that's one of the key messages. Next slide. So the budget ask, we need 100 million for MURA in 2026. And that's it. And the second one is, so CLTs and nonprofit housing providers, we need certainty about future capital commitments for affordable housing. How much is going to be in the future? And as was mentioned, this is nebulous in the way that the city does its budgeting. So next slide. Ask number 2, commit to funding MURA in the 10-year capital plan. Tell us how much there is going to be in the pipeline. Would be really important. Next slide. So that's essentially, that's a very, in a nutshell. I'm happy to answer questions, but I note that there's other people going to be talking to MURA more broadly. But my message is, when you're talking to the budget, come very specifically with examples from your neighborhood, and the more pressure we have, the more likelihood that we'll get to the target, even the target that we like anywhere near would be helpful. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dominique, for putting a spotlight on community land trust as well as the MURA project. That is one way that we could secure affordable housing and increase affordable housing, and making sure that these properties that we have within the city are allocated for that housing. I'm just looking at the chat now, but is there anyone who has any questions for Dominique? Oh, I see Danielle with their hand up.
Hi there. Thanks for the presentation. I wholeheartedly support getting the funding that you need and advocating for that. Because I actually think land trusts are the future for saving accessible and affordable housing in the city. The city relies too much on developers and as middle people, and I think this is the right way to go. My question pertains to, so I've noticed some REITs cropping up in the city of Toronto that are specifically targeting individual homes or low to maximum mid-rise apartment buildings. So they're cornering a market specifically that is kind of like, I guess, the last safe havens of affordable rents that aren't part of a land trust or aren't part of rent-geared housing. And, I'm dealing, one of them purchased my building during COVID. So we've been trying to help protect tenants with everything that's been going on there. These are people who have worked for BlackRock, and the owner of the company was a lawyer on Bay Street. So you can imagine the challenges and hoops. I just was wondering if there's anything that we could watch out for, or any other other supports or things we could advocate for to sort of help advocate sort of like against that process, because I see that working against a lot of people's interests right now, people who are vulnerable, people who need housing. We need housing to be a human right and not treated as an asset. So I didn't know if there is, just based on that, if there's anything else that might come to mind that you would like us to advocate for or to reflect on. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thanks for the question. And I will say that we're specifically MURA, I'm not sure if there's another way of protecting those vulnerable buildings from REITs except by having, nonprofit providers buy those buildings and take them off the speculative market. But it is really important. I'm seeing in the chat, the places where it's important. All of these things are important to our work. So tenants' rights. I would say, for us, we're focusing on MURA, but all of these things are interconnected. These injustices are interconnected, and so I think the advocating for housing in some way will ultimately help the land trust, because our interests are intertwined, I think.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? If not, and you can think of a question after, Dominique will be very happy to follow up with you after. I see no hands or anything, but thank you so much, Dominique, again. So we will go on to the next presentation. So I would like to welcome Chiara, who is a social worker and a community organizer. She founded the York South Weston Tenant Union to build tenant power. Over the years, the York South Weston Tenant Union has prevented hundreds of evictions, saved thousands of tenants, money on their rent, got repairs done, and has just won Toronto's largest rent strike in 4 high-rise buildings, which is amazing. Chiara is a firm believer that change comes from the bottom up, and we are always stronger together. So, Chiara, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon, and thank you, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining this webinar on advocating for housing, especially within the city and this budget process. I'm going to walk you through a few stories from the York South Weston Tenant Union, and I want to use them as examples of what's really important coming out from our members and how we can advocate for things in the budget. But before I get started, I want to just start with like 3 of our basic organizing principles. And just like Shannon said, I'm a firm believer that change comes from the bottom up and that we're stronger together. And so whenever I'm organizing around housing or around anything, I have these 3 principles I always keep in the back of my mind, and I like to share with people. So if there's one thing you remember from my presentation, I hope it's these 3 things. The first is that you're not alone. So when you are struggling with any kind of issue, whether it is the cost of your rent, an elevator not working in your building, the weight of the world on your shoulders, thinking, how on earth am I going to like catch up with these arrears and not get evicted? These are issues that so many of us are facing. And so I can guarantee you that your neighbor next door is having the same issues with their mold in their apartment, or the elevator not working, or the rent increase that is coming at the end of the month. And if we understand that we're not alone, and you're not alone, and you don't have to face these issues and these challenges on your own, then the second principle is we're stronger together. And when you come together with your neighbors and you join a tenant union, you make a tenant association in your building or in your community, then all of a sudden these issues and trying to address them move from being something that's really scary and intimidating into something that can be very, very empowering. And so when I talk about building tenant power, that's what I mean. I mean coming together and claiming our power, claiming our voice as a stronger collective. So you're not alone, we're stronger together. And the third principle is when we fight together, we win together. And, you know, I always say this to folks, and it's so, I'm not just saying it to be inspiring or get you guys motivated or riled up about deputating or, you know, joining a tenant union. I come with receipts. And so the examples I want to show in this presentation are based on successful organizing examples in our tenant union and how the city can support and expand that kind of work through the city budget process. So I'll move on. I'll ask for the next slide, Shannon. And I'll share some of these receipts. Okay, here we have a building, 80 Guestville, was bought by Michael Klein. So much of what I'm going to say relates to Dominique's presentation on just the financialization of housing, all these big corporations or big REITs coming in, buying affordable housing, and then doing everything they can to make it unaffordable and make it more profitable. And so this guy, Michael Klein, is notorious in Ontario as Ontario's king of renovictions. He buys up low-rise buildings like this one, and he flips them, evicts everybody so that he can bring in higher paying tenants. Okay, the guy's notorious. Now, I feel sorry for Michael Klein because he made the mistake of trying to come into York South Weston and pull the same shit. And that's not going to happen here, all right? Tenants in 80 Guestville have organized, come together. They've already resisted and won dozens of renoviction cases, but that wasn't enough. And what they've done now is they've come together, they formed a tenant association, and they are fighting them collectively. They're not doing it individually. They're not letting the LTB process kind of come in at them and make them separate and do that. No, we are fighting it collectively. And for the first time, Michael Klein has been summoned by the LTB themselves to come and defend himself and show face. So many of these big corporations, they hide behind numbered companies. They try to get away with doing all kinds of horrible things without being held accountable. We're holding Michael Klein accountable. We're not just playing defense against these renovictions. We want to make sure this guy pays and needs to be held responsible for all of these bad faith evictions that he's doing in New York South Weston and by extension across the province. And that only came because tenants joined together and refused to be separated in this collective struggle. And so how does this relate to the city and the budget process? Well, the first thing is that we have the new rent evictions bylaw, and I know other presenters are going to be talking about this, so I'm not going to jump in it in a lot of depth, but that is a really, really great bylaw, and how an example of how the city takes something that is really provincial legislation. All right. And I'm going to be honest with you. I think I can say this. And if I can, I apologize later. We've got a provincial government that does not care about tenants. All right. It's clear with Bill 60, all this other stuff that our provincial government's doing. We have a premier and a provincial government that does not care about tenants. However, we have a city government led by a mayor who does care about tenants. And so for the first time, I'm seeing a lot of progress being made on protecting tenant rights in the city. And one of those things is this rent evictions bylaw, which Laura and some of the other presenters here have been spending, what has it been, more than a decade trying to get into the city. And this has already been having a great, great impact on tenants. Unfortunately, it came in after Michael Klein bought 80 Guestville and started the rent evictions process for our members in 80 Guestville. So it's not going to help us here. However, it is going to prevent this kind of thing from happening in the future. And one thing I just want to plant in people's minds is, how can we use this example of the rent evictions bylaw? And if you're interested in kind of talking about the details about this, and you're like a bit of a policy nerd and like to do jurisdictional stuff like this, how can we use that and this permit process that the city has to kind of support tenants going through above guideline increases? So in the same kind of way we have this rent evictions bylaw, it's like a screening tool. How can we make something similar for above guideline increases? Because this is something that we know tenants all over the city are facing, and it's making their rents more and more unaffordable every year. So that's a question. I want to plant that into the audience because this is something I'm interested in working on. And if I can get the next slide, or the next thing. In terms of the budget asks, when it comes to this example with 80 Guestville, so not only has Michael Klein been trying to rent evict everyone with bogus rent eviction applications, but he's also trying to evict people because of air conditioners. All right. And he's made it incredibly difficult for the members of this building to get an air conditioner. And what's inside the budget, and I applaud this in the budget, is expanding the air conditioner support program so that more people will be able to get city-supported air conditioner installed in their ACs to beat the climate change that we're seeing, and like just the heat that we get in Toronto. However, one thing that might be a good idea, knowing what we know tenants experience when they do install an AC, is how can we support tenants to be prevented from an eviction or any kind of extra additional charges when they finally do install that AC. Can I get the next slide? All right. And then here's another example of a really successful organizing from members of 1440 and 1442 Lawrence Avenue West. They had horrible conditions in their building for more, actually now it's been 10 years, for just under a decade. So bad, Canada Post stopped delivering to them. Okay. And they tried everything. They tried the rent safe. They tried talking to the city council. They tried calling 301. They did everything. And these horrible conditions persisted for so long. What did the tenants do? They didn't say, okay, well, that's it. Nothing's going to change. No, they got together. They organized with one another. And in this case, they went on a rent strike, which finally forced the landlord to get those repairs done in people's units. And so this is one of the PR stunts we did. We brought all of the mice that were caught dead in the building and we delivered them to their landlord's house. As you can see, I'm holding up a dead mouse there. But one of the things that's really great that has been changing in the city is on Rent Safe Toronto. We're finally getting some teeth behind Rent Safe Toronto so that tenants don't have to go on rent strike just to get their landlord to do their basic jobs, right? And we finally have the color-coded signs coming in. So these are huge, huge, huge wins, grounded in tenant experiences, grounded in tenant fights. that the city is finally responding to. And again, I amend the city, I amend the mayor for finally getting some real action on this. In terms of the budget asks, if I can get Shannon to do the next click. Finally, one of the things that's happening with Rent Safe Toronto, and this came out of some of the organizing we did around multi-housing tenant, that's rooming houses. We had a horrible case of a bunch of tenants that had no electricity, no heat for 6 months during the winter, is remedial action. So that is, if the landlord is refusing to abide by the basic building standards, then the city comes in, fixes it themselves, and then bills the landlord. But that still requires an emergency remedial action fund. So that's one of the things that we'd like to see. We're getting more teeth into Rent Safe, but we'd like to see an emergency remedial action fund so that when a building like 1440 and 1442, or this rooming house, is struggling with a severe infestation so bad that Canada Post stops delivering mail, then the city can come in, do the treatment themselves, and bill the landlord for it. And then the other budget asks is like, man, when landlords are not following their basic jobs, when they're getting orders to comply from the city and they're not following those orders to comply, they are not making those repairs. We've got one of our members, the entire building has collapsed, like the garage has collapsed, and it's still collapsed. There's an order to comply by the City of Toronto that says, you have an unsafe building, you need to rectify this. Been 5 months. These tenants are still getting charged parking, even though they can't even access their cars because the parking garage has collapsed. So we need to see fines being placed on landlords that are not actually responding to these orders to comply, to get them to actually start taking action faster. Can I get the next slide? And this has been one of our asks for a really long time, is rent control on all homes built on public land. If you're getting public land or you're getting public money for housing, the basic condition of that needs to be that that housing will be following the most basic tenant right, which is rent control. It gives security of housing to people. It gives people a way of being comfortable with what to expect next. And so this is an example outside of 22 John. One of the things that we see every level of government, to be honest, doing is that this reliance on public-private partnerships for housing. 22 John is an example of that. It was one of the first ones that came in under John Tory. What happened? We gave this public land to a private developer. They built this condo-like apartment building. And then all the tenants got like 25% rent increases after the first year. That is not helping the affordability crisis. And we've seen some major progress under Mayor Chow to actually bring in some more affordable housing on public land. But something that's still missing is this basic principle of rent control. And that means that these units need to be following the provincially set guideline of rent control, regardless of when they were built. So even though they were built after 2018, which is the provincial government's exception, we need to see them fully rent controlled if they're built on public lands. Can I get the next slide? And so with the budget asks, this is really connected to what Dominique was talking about. We need to see more MURA funding because just like she said, we can't build our way out of this crisis. And we are losing affordable housing faster than we are building it because every time a new building gets bought up by someone like Michael Klein or bought up like someone like Capri or Starlight, those rents do not stay affordable and they get doubled when the new tenants move in and they've successfully evicted someone. So we really, really, really need to right now, especially when building conditions are so expensive, is instead of building new housing that won't be rent controlled, that won't be affordable, we need to protect the affordable housing that we have by buying up that housing through the MURA program and keeping it in community public ownership, because that protects the tenants. And then, like, guys, we need to start, this sounds horrible, but we need to start thinking like the way these big developers think, but for the purposes of affordable housing. So Michael Klein shouldn't have bought 80 Guestville. The city of Toronto should have bought 80 Guestville. What would have happened when, let's say, a couple tenants move out of 80 Guestville? Great. They move out of 80 Guestville. We've got wonderful apartments, big 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom apartments. Man, let's add those to the social housing waiting list. Let's make them rent geared to housing. And let's start taking advantage of tenant turnover, but not for doubling the rents, but for adding rent geared to income units on that social housing waiting list that we know is way too long, right? It's only going to happen if we increase MURA funding. Next slide. Finally, guys, Rent Bank, cannot tell you how much of a lifesaver that is for our members. Huge kudos to the mayor for increasing the funding to the Rent Bank and the EPIC program. These are really, really important programs that are definitely helping protect tenants, okay? Without a doubt, I cannot tell you the number of our members who have saved their tenancies because of these programs. What I would ask is, again, I know I'm putting a lot of pressure on the city, but it's because we have a provincial government that is attacking tenants, and our only real government that is protecting them is our city government. So what I would like to see from the city in terms of a budget ask is a legal challenge against Bill 60. That was the bill that really, really, really wants to fast track evictions. It's going to make more and more people needing to rely on these eviction programs of the city, the shelter system. So even just putting up a bit more of a fight against the province is really going to help save the city money down the line. So if I can get the next slide from Shannon. We're looking for funding a legal challenge to Bill 60 from the city and maybe partnering with other municipalities to say, hey, Bill 60 still sucks. Even though passed, it still sucks. We're coming together to actually challenge the provincial government on this. Next slide. And then remember, okay, you're not alone. We're stronger together. And when we fight together, we win together. And I'd like to invite everyone who's interested in joining this kind of advocacy to sign up on our website. It's tenantunion.ca/membership. And we'd love to have you. We would love to build a huge army of tenant advocates in the city of Toronto to make sure that tenant rights won't be eroded, but that we can get more wins like we've been seeing in the last couple of years.
Thank you so much, Chiara. Thank you so much. I've seen a lot of people clapping, a lot of people putting in the chats, talking in the chat. And they're definitely inspired, which is what we're hoping to do, to engage in tenant advocacy. So thank you so much, Chiara. We'll move on to our next presenter, Jonella. So Jonella is a community development professional with experience in the nonprofit sector, working with marginalized communities and residents across Toronto, as well as experience supporting local housing coalitions. Jonella is a community engagement and advocacy advisor with the Canadian Centre for Housing Rights. In this role, she coordinates the Right to Housing Toronto network, working to support the implementation of the right to housing by the City of Toronto. So I'll pass it on to you, Jonella.
Great. Hi, everyone, and thanks, Shannon, for that introduction. So I'm glad to be joining this workshop on behalf of Right to Housing TO and presenting alongside all these other amazing presenters. And so for today, I'll present on the city's multi-tenant housing framework, as well as share some of Right to Housing TO's own advocacy work on this issue. So next slide. So for my presentation, I'll just share at a high level the city's multi-tenant housing framework, and I'll refer to multi-tenant housing as MTHs, also known as rooming houses. I'll take some time just to walk through the benefits and concerns that MTH advocates have identified with the framework, along with sharing some of our advocacy and updates. And I specifically wanted to highlight Right to Housing TO's recommendations in response to the city's implementation of this framework. And lastly, share some of the key messages on MTHs that can be amplified through the budget process and deputations. Next slide. Perfect. So just about the Right to Housing Toronto. So as mentioned, I'm presenting on behalf of Right to Housing TO, which is a network of organizations and individuals working to support the implementation of the right to housing by the City of Toronto. And Right to Housing TO has been working alongside several community partners and other MTH advocates over the past years, advocating for the legalization of MTHs in Toronto and now around the implementation of the city's MTH framework. So next slide. And so just to provide a brief background on the MTH framework. So this framework was developed to really address a lot of the long-standing challenges when it came to regulating MTHs across the city, as well as address the unsafe living conditions that were in these unlicensed rooming houses. And so Toronto City Council adopted this new regulatory framework for MTHs in 2022, and it came into effect on March 31st, 2024. And so this framework really introduced a new approach to allow multi-tenant housing to operate citywide, where it was only previously legal within Old Toronto. We're seeing it legal throughout all of Toronto, so including the suburbs of Etobicoke, North York, and Scarborough. This framework includes a new licensing bylaw, as well as a phased approach to licensing and enforcement. Next slide. So I just wanted to quickly walk through some of the benefits and concerns with the framework that we've identified as the framework is being implemented. So we recognize the framework has really been an important step to protect and increase affordable housing as it permits MTHs across the city, as I mentioned. This framework also requires MTH operators to meet health and safety standards. And along with this framework, the city has set up an MTH renovation and repair fund. And this is to help operators to come into compliance, and this protects renters from rent increases. And then just to speak to some of the key concerns of the MTH framework, our advocacy really has been concerned around, as the framework is being implemented, the potential around the high risk of renter displacement, the loss of affordable housing, as well as the lack of tenant supports and protections for displaced MTH renters. And we recognize that the potential displacement and loss is really potentially as a result of the 6-room cap. So in suburban areas, there is only a 6-room cap to MTHs. And currently we know that a lot of the unlicensed rooming houses that exist outside of Old Toronto do have more than 6 rooms. So I think with operators coming into compliance and limiting the amount of MTH units they can provide, there's big concern around the potential displacement it might cause for the other tenants. And then also for operator sales and conversions, where it might be too much of a burden for operators to come to compliance, whether through the cost of coming through compliance and the renovations, they may end up choosing to sell the building itself or convert MTHs to a single household. And that is really a loss of the affordable housing that these MTH units provide. Next slide. So just recognizing these concerns, we've really centered our advocacy around MTH protections and supports, as well as the preservation of these MTH affordable units. So with the city's MTH framework in place, rooming houses should really provide adequate housing for tenants, and this emphasizes housing that is affordable, secure, and habitable. So our MTH advocacy work that we've taken on has been involved ongoing engagement with community partners and MTH advocates to identify concerns, share information, and advocate for better protections and supports for MTH tenants. And we focus on MTH advocacy, just knowing that MTHs are a critical part of Toronto's affordable housing system and really provides homes to some of the most vulnerable residents. And this includes refugees, newcomers, students, and other low-income and marginalized groups. And we know that when MTH tenants lose their home, many of them face risk of homelessness due to the shortage of affordable housing within Toronto, and really the limited rehousing supports that are provided to them. And so our advocacy for Right to Housing Toronto, we really believe that by taking a rights-based approach to implementing this framework, we know that the city has a key role in preventing renter displacement and homelessness of these vulnerable tenants as well. And so to date, so it's been over a year since the framework has come into effect. And this past December, a staff report provided an overview of the activities and outcomes from the first year of the MTH framework's implementation and presented it to the city's Planning and Housing Committee. And so Right to Housing TO shared our recommendations to the city and supported community partners to submit their own letters and depute on the issue as well. And so we'll share a bit more about these recommendations in the next slides. But just wanted to note that following the report, Right to Housing TO plans to evaluate the city's MTH framework using a human rights-based approach. And so we're currently working on completing an MTH assessment and hope to release it sometime in the spring. And so that is a way that we aim to keep the city accountable to their commitment to the right to housing. Next slide. So in the staff report that came out last month, we really welcome the city's some of the city's proposed changes, and that was aimed to improve access to the MTH renovation program, to clarify licensing and zoning requirements. However, we're still concerned that the city's approach doesn't adequately address these ongoing gaps that we see in the framework. And this includes addressing these specific situations when it comes to the potential MTH displacement and affordable housing loss that I've previously mentioned. And so in response, Right to Housing TO has put together some recommendations, and this is based on engagement with other MTH advocates for the city to consider as they move forward with the implementation of this framework. And so at a high level, we grouped our recommendations under these 4 areas. So 1, to provide meaningful support for MTH renters. So in addition to focusing on supporting operators to come into compliance with the new framework, there needs to be these proper supports for MTH tenants as well. And so this includes displacement protection and enhanced outreach and engagement. Secondly, recommendations to remove restrictive MTH requirements. So as mentioned, the 6-room cap is discouraging some operators to come into compliance. And so by increasing the room count, it can help minimize displacement of these tenants. And we also recommend for the city to explore providing these zoning and licensing exemptions for city-funded properties to encourage operators to continue providing affordable housing. Third, just to increase funding for MTH preservation. So we've heard a lot from the other presenters, the importance to preserve the existing affordable housing that we have. And we're seeing the challenge that many MTH operators are concerned about complying with the framework, just with the cost to do so. And some operators might be altering their operations, so either choosing, as I mentioned, to sell or convert their unit, or reduce the number of rooms that really leads to tenant displacement. So by increasing funding for MTH preservation through the renovation and repair funding, as well as acquisition funding that I'll speak to a bit later, these are ways that we can preserve affordable housing. And then lastly, strengthening MTH monitoring, enforcement, and accountability. So this really addresses the gap that the city hasn't been able to gather sufficient data on unlicensed MTHs and isn't tracking outcomes for these displaced renters or the loss of these individual MTH units. So we're really putting forward a recommendation for the city to strengthen their internal coordination across the multiple housing divisions that work on MTHs, strengthen their data collection, monitoring and reporting, and also expand the mandate of the new situation, the STAR tables, the situation table, housing at risk, to ensure they can provide those supports and policy recommendations to the city. So next slide. So as we consider MTHs in regard to the city budget, we've seen that in the staff proposed budget, there's actually very little mention of MTHs in the budget as is. And this is despite the city committing to more MTH renter outreach in the year one update report. Additionally, the current budget commits no additional funding for these key renter supports like the Toronto Tenant Support Program and EPIC, which are the two programs that support MTH tenants explicitly. And so from the recommendations that I previously spoke to, I've pulled some of the key messages that focus on budget asks around the MTH framework. So one, develop targeted programs and policies to support MTH renters facing displacement, such as emergency and/or portable housing benefits, alternative housing solutions, and/or system navigation. So Chiara spoke to the situation in terms of an MTH building that faced shortage of had their vital services turned off. And so this is where being able to provide these emergency or portable housing benefits can really ensure that these issues are being addressed immediately while providing those supports to tenants in the interim. And next kind of key message is around increasing Toronto tenant support program funding to conduct more proactive outreach for MTH renters and provide ongoing engagement opportunities. So the TTSP program funds nonprofits and community-based organizations to provide a variety of housing supports to residents. And this includes legal supports and tenant outreach and education. And I know, or I believe Laura will also speak to this. And so the TTSP has funded a rooming house organizer position through FMTA. However, we still need to increase this funding to conduct more of this proactive outreach. And this really helps build on tenant awareness and education around the framework itself. Another key message is around increasing funding for and improving access to the MTH renovation and repair program to help operators come into compliance with the MTH framework. And this is hopefully an ask that will ensure that those MTH operators that want to continue to provide affordable housing can continue to do so while coming under compliance without passing on any renovation costs towards the tenant. And to note that the city's new renovation bylaw does apply to MTH housing that might be undergoing renovations as well. And then lastly, a budget ask around prioritizing and maximizing funding for the MURA program. And this is to preserve affordable rental housing across the city, including supporting community housing providers to acquire MTHs at risk of sale or conversion. And so as Dominique spoke to the MURA program, a lot of MTH units are provide affordable housing to vulnerable tenants. And so by being able to acquire some of these MTH buildings or units that might be at risk, it allows us to keep affordable housing and continue to house tenants that have been in their MTH units for many years and ensure that housing can remain affordable. So I just wanted, so as mentioned, a lot of these programs and a lot of these programs around the budget intersect with a lot of the other key messages and budget asks that other presenters have put forward. So I've just wanted to highlight through this presentation more information on the city's MTH framework and really the importance of our advocacy work, especially as it focuses on the preservation of affordable housing and tenant protections and supports. So hoping that folks can kind of take some of this information away and amplify it in their budget asks. And the next slide, I think, just share some of the information to keep in touch with Right to Housing TO.
Thank you so much, Jonella, for such an insightful presentation and really shedding the light on MTHs and the framework and the advocacy needed, especially during this budget season. So thank you again, Jonella. Then now we'll go to Laura. So our next guest speaker is Laura, who is a community development worker at Don Valley Community Legal Services. She works closely with her colleagues on the housing law team to help renters. She previously worked for Councillor Paula Fletcher for the past for 6 years, where her work on the City of Toronto's rent evictions bylaw began. She's a passionate tenant advocate and has served on the board of directors of the Federation of Metro Tenants Association since 2021. So Laura, I'll pass it on to you.
Great, thanks, Shannon. Hi, everybody. So again, my name is Laura. I am a community development worker at Don Valley Community Legal Services. For those unfamiliar with the legal clinic system in Ontario, there are community legal clinics across the province and across Toronto. I'm at Don Valley. We are located in Toronto's East End, and we are funded by the province through Legal Aid Ontario. As many of my colleagues here have talked about, and I'm sure many of you are aware of, the province is not a friend of tenants, and we are struggling to keep people in their homes. And that is why the City of Toronto programs and services for tenants are so important to the work we do. So next slide, I'm just going to give a quick overview of municipal versus provincial. I think this helps frame our discussion here of the programs the city provides. So in Ontario, we have the Residential Tenancies Act, the RTA, and that's what sets out the rights and responsibilities of landlords and tenants who rent residential properties. So a lot of the issues we are talking about, they go either provincial or they go municipal. You've probably heard the term municipalities are creatures of the province. The city is very limited in what it can do. I think Chiara had mentioned the rent evictions bylaw. That was a very creative bylaw where the city was able to do something it normally couldn't do. It got very creative and found sort of a loophole to stop rent evictions because evictions fall under provincial jurisdiction. So things, like evictions, like rent control. So if you get your rent increase, there's a guideline set by the province every year. This year it's 2.1%. Or if you get an above guideline increase, an AGI or Aggie, that's also provincial. Vacancy control, which we need desperately in Ontario, that is also provincial. Right now in Ontario, we have what's called vacancy decontrol. So when a tenant moves out and a new tenant moves in, the rent can increase any amount. There's no limit on what the landlord can increase the rent between tenants. So those are provincial issues. The city can't really do much about those. So what the city can do, though, is they can support tenants and they can help protect tenants' rights and they can help preserve affordable rental housing within their jurisdiction. And here at the legal clinic, we refer many, many clients to city programs because the landlord and tenant board, the RTA, they are flawed. It's a broken system, and too many tenants are being evicted and displaced. Tenants' rights are being eroded. We've seen that with Bill 60 that was introduced by the Doug Ford government. So the city has actually really stepped up the past couple of years under Mayor Chow to protect tenants. We saw that with the rent evictions bylaw, and in the past couple of years, we have won increases in funding to these programs the city provides for tenants. So our advocacy is working, and I just wanted to note that we appreciate what the city does, because a lot of the time we can't do things legally to help tenants, but these programs sort of fill the gaps for them. Okay, so next slide. So the programs, I'm going to give a quick overview of these today and why they're so important and how you can advocate for them in the city's budget this year. So we have Rent Safe TO, we have the Toronto Rent Bank, we have Eviction Prevention in the Community, EPIC, and we have the Toronto Tenant Support Program. Okay, next slide. So I'm sure many of us are familiar with Rent Safe. It is the city's program that ensures apartment building owners, so landlords, comply with building maintenance standards. So, for example, if you're a tenant, and this actually happened to me, and your bathroom ceiling is coming down, and your landlord's not doing anything to fix it, and you've asked them, you've sent a request in for repairs, you can call the city. You can call 311, and a bylaw officer will get in touch with you and can investigate these types of issues for repairs and maintenance. They can issue notices to landlords. For this example, the bylaw officer called me up. They came and looked at the hole in my ceiling. I will say Rent Safe is not a perfect program. I know there are many issues. I hear from tenants all the time. Many right now in Thorncliffe Park who are facing issues with no heating. So it's not a perfect program, but it's something at least that we can go to when we do have issues. The one thing that I think we've talked about a lot is that Rent Safe lacks teeth. To enforce landlords to do this work is sometimes a struggle. We've seen that in situations at buildings like 500 Dawes in East York, where the landlord refuses to do anything, and the city has fined her, and she's still not making repairs. And that's why something like remedial action, where the city can step in and make those repairs, is so important. And that's something, again, that we're going to push for. Rent Safe still needs more funding, and we still want the city to take on more remedial action when the system fails. So that's Rent Safe. And then I think next slide, I'm just going to quickly talk about so also a part of Rent Safe are the building evaluations. So the bylaw officers will evaluate buildings every year and give them a rating. Again, I know this is not a perfect program, and a lot of the ratings are probably higher than they should be. I know Rent Safe actually is doing consultation right now. There is a survey. If you go to the city's website, toronto.ca/rentsafe, there is a survey you can take it and give feedback to the city on this program, because again, I know there are many problems with it. But it's still a helpful way something tenants can go to when their landlord and the Residential Tenancies Act and the Landlord and Tenant Board have failed them. Because the other option tenants have is they can do a tenant application at the Landlord and Tenant Board, and maybe a year later you'll get a hearing. So Rent Safe is much quicker, and I have seen some successful cases. It's not always broken. So that's Rent Safe. And then the next slide should be about the color-coded signs. Yes. So we are seeing an increase. I believe it's close to $1 million this year in the budget for Rent Safe to hire more staff, because color-coded signs are coming out in July, which is good. This is something tenant advocates have been asking for years. It's similar to the city's Dine Safe program. We have the green, yellow, red signs, and they'll be posted on buildings that will reflect their building evaluation score. So good to see more funding, good to see more staff. I think separate from the budget, just more advocacy we can do on making sure Rent Safe is an effective program and that the city can enforce these rules on landlords. So that's something else we can talk about later. Next slide. I want to touch on this quickly because this will apply eventually in 2026. So we are hopefully going to get a maximum temperature bylaw this year. This was approved by City Council in December, so we'll see a report back from city staff this May with a proposed bylaw. And what this means is right now we have a heat bylaw in Toronto in the winter months. So if the temperature inside your rental unit is below 21 degrees, you could call the city, call 311. A bylaw officer will investigate and take some temperature readings, and they can get your landlord to, increase the heat, fix the heat. Maybe it's a boiler problem, provide space heaters until it's fixed. That's what the heat bylaw does. And now with the growing climate crisis and increasing temperatures in the summer, we are seeing many tenants suffering from heat, especially seniors. And there is no law, there's no requirement, whether provincial or municipal, for how high a temperature can be. So what this bylaw will do is if your unit is 26 degrees or higher, you can call the city for that as well, hopefully. And so I'm not sure how this will come into play. Landlords might be required to provide air conditioning units to tenants to keep that temperature lower in the summer. But this is great. We need this. We have a lot of clients here at the legal clinic that are suffering from heat in the summer. And we want to make sure also that that any expenses from this are not passed down to tenants through rent increases. So look out for this in May. I'm sure if you're in touch with any of the agencies here talking today, we will let you know about how to be involved in this advocacy. But again, this will fall under rent safe eventually, the same way the heat bylaw is right now. Okay, next slide. Okay, so Toronto Rent Bank. This is a very, very important program, and we've seen the numbers increasing over the years. It used to be a loan, and it's now a grant for the past few years, which is great, so tenants don't have to pay it back. So if you are behind on your rent, something's happened, and you need, a bit of money to help you through the next couple months, Rent Bank might be able to support you. It's led by the Neighborhood Information Post. And these grants can help low-income tenants and their families to stay in their homes and avoid eviction. This is so important. We refer so many people to Rent Bank. It's not a long-term solution. I want to note this. We have a lot of clients where something's happened in their life and they don't have the same income anymore. And Rent Bank might be able to sustain them for a couple of months, but then they don't have any income coming in. And we've seen those people losing their homes. Rent Bank is a great program, and I hope there's something more we can do to help tenants in the long term, because again, it's not a long-term solution, but it's a wonderful program, and we need to keep advocating for more funding for this. It's saving people's homes, it's keeping them in their homes, and fighting eviction. So that's Rent Bank. Next slide. Epic. So this is, again, another very, very important program. We refer so many clients to this. This one, I want to talk about our experience at the legal clinic. Epic was a smaller program a few years ago, and through our collective advocacy, Epic has received more funding and more support from the city. And my legal clinic has become one of the agencies that can actually refer clients directly to Epic, which is wonderful. We've seen many of our clients, their homes saved through Epic. Their staff will help connect tenants with different supports that they need to fight eviction, give them the resources to help them sustain their rent in the long term. It's a wonderful program. And again, I'd always say Epic could use more funding. I don't believe there's any increase in funding for Epic this year, but we know how important this program is. So that is something we can definitely advocate for next week. If you're making a deputation or sending a letter to say we need more money for Epic, please. Okay, and then next slide. This is a great program, Toronto Tenant Support Program. I'm also on the board of the FMTA, so shout out to FMTA. The TTSP used to be called the Tenant Defense Fund. So a few years ago, tenant associations could apply to that fund and get a grant to hire a paralegal to help them fight an above guideline rent increase. It's now changed. We have this Toronto Tenant Support Program, And through TTSP, the following three organizations are funded. So FMTA, Federation of Metro Tenants Associations, they run a tenant hotline that you can call for legal information on your rights as a tenant. They also have an outreach and organizing team that will go out and help tenants organize in their buildings to fight rent increases, to help deal with bad landlords, to create tenants associations. And the FMTA also hosts tenant schools and workshops throughout the year. So if you haven't heard of FMTA and you'd like to learn more about your rights or get involved in organizing, please visit their website, give them a call, reach out to them. The other organization funded here is the Canadian Centre for Housing Rights. They are not a legal clinic funded by Legal Aid Ontario like Don Valley is, but they do provide legal support for tenants. They have lawyers on their staff, and their main part of being funded by TTSP is to provide that legal support to tenants. So if you are facing an AGI and in your building, you can reach out to CCHR and they hopefully will be able to help you. You have to meet eligibility requirements and be lower income to get this legal support from CCHR. But they fill a big role and a gap that the community legal clinics don't do. So most community legal clinics, such as Don Valley, we do not help tenants fight at AGIs. We can give them legal information, but we don't represent tenants at the Landlord and Tenant Board for AGIs, and we don't do the organizing part either. So if this is something you're facing in your building, reach out to CCHR and hopefully get that legal support to fight AGIs. And you can also reach out to FMTA for that organizing support. A lot of these things we tag team together. And then the last agency here is the Center for Immigrant and Community Services. They are funded by TTSP. They also run a tenant support hotline. They also provide workshops and training and education and information in multilingual or in different languages. So they are a great resource as well. So I believe it's these three organizations are funded through TTSP for 3 years from 2025 to 2028. So I don't believe there's any increase in funding this year. Last year, there was a bit of an increase because of the rent evictions bylaw and the multi-tenant housing framework. They needed to bump up the funding to help these organizations fill some gaps there with the new bylaws and framework coming into place. I will say, I think we're all at capacity. I know there's only so much we can do. FMTA is a very busy organization, and all of us could use more funding. So as you're advocating in the budget, ask for more funding for TTSP. There is only so much you can do legally. Legal clinics, through the Landlord and Tenant Board and the RTA, there's things we just can't do. And one of the best way to fight an AGI or to fight a bad landlord is to organize. And to organize, you need support and resources, and that's what the TTSP provides. They fill a big gap that it's in a broken legal system. That's what I will say here. So yeah, shout out to TTSP. Next slide. Oh yeah, it's basically what I said. So as we've seen again with Bill 60 and with a provincial Ford government that doesn't care about tenants, has rolled back rent control, is fast tracking evictions and eroding our rights. The city is stepping up to fill these gaps that are created by the province. Again, similar to the rent evictions bylaw, the province wouldn't do it, so the city did it. We need TTSP. We don't want to see any of this funding decreased. We need more funding to help tenants stay in their homes. And the more tenants we help, the more tenants we protect, the more affordable rental housing we are protecting. Because again, back to vacancy control, once a tenant moves out, the landlord can increase the rent any amount. So we are losing so much affordable rental housing through eviction. And that's why programs like this are so important. Next slide. We've touched on this already, so I won't go too in depth, but MURA, the multi-unit residential acquisition program, another amazing program, land trusts, all of this. We need to protect the affordable rental housing we already have. We will never build our way out of this. All of these programs go hand in hand. It's about keeping people in their homes. So just wanted to touch on that quickly. Next one. rent eviction bylaw. So important. I've talked about this already, but this is great work the city has done to fill a huge void where the province has failed us. And I don't think we need to ask for more funding. This was a big win, and we got some more funding last year. And through, I don't think we need to say too much more about this, but I think there'll be a report back in 2027 about how the bylaw is going. I will say from our legal clinic, we've only received one rent eviction case in 2025. So we've already seen a huge decrease in rent evictions. So I don't think, that we need to ask for too much for funding for this. But just if you are doing a deputation or sending a letter, you can mention it. Shout out to the city for this work that you did. This is how the city can step up and help tenants. Yeah. Next slide. And I just wanted to plug this as well. The city does a lot of great work for tenants. This is the new version of their eviction handbook. It's a great resource. A lot of the folks here, I think, have played a role in developing this with the city. Again, where the province doesn't help us, the city steps in. Next slide. Yeah, so that is it that I was going to talk about. Those are all the programs that I think we need to advocate for, and the city should continue to increase funding for. And we've seen our collective advocacy work because we had some big wins last year. So please include all of these programs in your deputations and letters and advocacy next week and next couple of weeks. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. And I think we are sharing the slides. So happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Laura, for really highlighting these programs and really underscoring the importance for stronger needed investment and advocacy for them. So we'll go now. I will stop the recording. And we will also now go to all our presenters. Thank you again to all of you for sharing your work, your experiences, and all your advocacy initiatives. So for